This is a brief introduction to some of the key provisions of the American Institute of Architects form document, the B101. The AIA B101 is the basic owner-architect agreement that's used when the project delivery method is design, bid, build. And as the name design, bid, build suggests, the first step is to come up with a design. Now, there are three different articles that I want to focus on in this presentation as really containing some of the most important provisions of the B101. The first provision, or the first group of provisions, is in Article 3, and this defines the scope of the architect's services. Basically, what is it that the architect's supposed to be doing? And as you'll see from the bullet points, there are really three different design-related functions that the architect performs. First, schematic design. This is just getting the conceptual drawings down. Okay, the owner wants to build a commercial office building or a hospital or whatever it may be. And the architect gets certain information about what the owner's objectives are, what the owner's budget is, etc. So that the architect has some basic ideas about what the parameters of the project are going to be. The next phase is to develop that design, and this is a process, it's an ongoing iterative process between the architect and the owner, coming up with a design that, yes, we want that, no, we don't want this other thing, can you change this around, etc., so as to try to achieve the owner's objectives. Then the final step in that design process is to come up with the actual construction documents. That is, the plans that the owner will put out to bid to different contractors, that the contractors will study in order to prepare their bids, and that ultimately can be used to construct the project. And these will consist of a whole series of different categories of design documents. There'll be things like mechanical drawings and electrical drawings, structural drawings, things like this, as well as the specifications of materials, etc. The next item in the list of what the architect does is help the owner with the procurement, that is, putting the design documents out to bid in a competitive bidding process. Because, as I said, this is the foundational agreement between the owner architect in a design, bid, build project delivery method. What that means is first you have the design, then once that's complete, and we all know what it is that the contractors are supposed to be bidding on, those bids, those documents, those drawings can be put out to bid to different contractors who then all know, okay, we're building a Cadillac, and it's going to have a V8, and it's got 4 wheels of X size, and it's got this and that. And so it's easier in this project delivery method to compare apples to apples, because all of the contractors are looking at the same construction documents, they're bidding on the same things. And so the architect typically, because the architect usually has more experience in construction than the owner does, will assist with that process, getting the bid packages ready to go out to contractors, answering questions, sort of generally administering the bidding process. And then finally, what the architect's responsible for is in the construction phase, when the shovels actually hit the ground and the work starts on the project, the architect will be responsible for answering questions that come up during the construction process about the construction documents that the architect has prepared, generally observing the progress of the work, certifying the contractor's progress pay applications, and finally sort of administering the closeout process, where once the project is completed, the contractor has to turn over as-built drawings, take care of any outstanding items in the nature of a punch list, things like that. So the scope of services really defines what it is that the architect's supposed to be doing. Now, Article 11, which I also want you to pay attention to, entitled Compensation, basically means what it says, and there are two different models here. One is a stipulated sum, which is where the architect simply performs the scope of services that we just went through for a fixed dollar amount. The other possibility is a percentage basis, that is, a percentage of the cost of the work. And here the architect gets compensated as a fraction of the total estimated cost of the project. And so as the project gets bigger or smaller in scope, depending on the owner's budget and objectives, the architect's fee may go up or down. But those are the two basic ways by which architects get compensated under the B101. Finally, one thing about the B101 that I want to draw your attention to is Article 7, which has to do with copyright matters. And Article 7 makes very clear that the architect owns the, quote, instruments of service. Now, to get to the definition of instruments of service, you have to go to another document, which is the A201. The A201 defines instruments of service as essentially any creative work that the architect has prepared in connection with this particular project. So plans, drawings, specifications, things like this. So under the unamended B101, the architect owns all of that stuff. And that's important because some owners expect that, especially if we're talking about a one-of-a-kind sort of building, that because the owner's paying the architect's fees, that the owner will own the plans and specifications, etc., and could use those plans and specifications on another project if it wanted to. But that's not the way the B101 is structured. Under the B101, the architect owns all that stuff. And so all the architect does is grant to the owner a limited, non-exclusive license to use those instruments of service. So this can be a point of negotiation between the owner and the architect at the outset in negotiating the B101. Who's going to own the instruments of service? Owners want to own them, architects want to own them. And it really depends on the nature of the project. If this is essentially these are plans and specifications for what's more or less a cookie cutter kind of project, the architect may well say, well, look, I'm charging you less because I'm reusing or modifying slightly plans that I developed on somebody else's project. And so there's usually a higher price tag associated with the owner getting ownership of the instruments of service. But this is an important area of negotiation. It's an area where copyright law overlaps with construction law. So the B101 is important because it lays out the roles and responsibilities as between the owner and the architect in this design, bid, build, project delivery method. And it helps define, along with the A201, which we'll see later on, the roles and responsibilities of at least these two participants in the construction process, the owner and the architect.